We just got our hands on brand new seasonal data, and what I'm seeing right now genuinely stopped me in my tracks. August has arrived, and with it comes fresh, updated seasonal guidance, and both models I'm digging into today are painting a picture that could mean serious snow for a huge chunk of this country. If you've watched my recent videos, you know I've been building toward this moment, breaking down piece after piece of long-range data because you kept asking for more. Today we're going deep into the CANCIPS model and the CFS model, both freshly updated, and in a few weeks, once the European seasonal model and Japan's JMA model roll out their updates, I'll bring you another full breakdown. For now, what these two models are hinting at for fall and winter is honestly a bit stunning. Both runs lean unusually cold, and the moisture signals lining up behind that cold air could translate into massive snow events across different regions. Let's get into it. By the way, please leave your questions or comments in the comments section. I will answer each one individually as time permits. Also, I would be very happy if you liked the video and subscribed to my channel. Now, let's continue. Let's start with the CANCIPS monthly breakdown, working from right now through the heart of winter. For August, we're looking at a cooler tilt settling into the north-central states and pockets of the interior northeast, while warmth dominates the west and south. Move into September and the pattern barely shifts. The plains and Midwest stay locked into that cooler groove, and the chill starts creeping into the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic too. For those along the eastern seaboard sitting in that lighter blue, lighter yellow, or neutral shading, expect a back and forth of cooler and warmer stretches since we're averaging a full month here. That said, a couple regions stand out. The upper Midwest and north-central states lean unmistakably cold for most of the month, while the West Coast is just as clearly locked into warmth. By October, the signal sharpens, with a clearer push of warmth crawling up the East Coast, while the trough sinks a bit deeper into the Midwest and plains. That positive PNA pattern, the one keeping the West Coast mild, holds strong into November, and as it does, the cold keeps sliding south. By November, most of the interior nation sits at or below normal temperatures, while the West and East Coast remain warmer. Then December hits, and things get genuinely interesting. Warmth along the east starts losing its grip, and that cold air pooled over the plains, Midwest, and deep south spreads outward, even into the Great Lakes. This setup looks like a ridge and trough pattern, funneling the jet stream more directly through the eastern states. Fantastic news for snow chances across the Appalachians and the Ohio Valley. The precipitation side backs this up too. January gets even more dramatic. Cold air pushes further east, with blue tones creeping into the southeast and mid-Atlantic and only lighter yellow lingering in a handful of spots. Even where it's not outright cold, we're talking average at worst, nothing close to a mild month along the East Coast. Meanwhile, the West keeps riding that same warm trend we've watched for a couple of years, built on a persistently positive PNA that keeps forcing cold into the central and eastern states. Exactly why we've had back-to-back colder than normal winters. February takes it further, with sharper cold departures mainly centered on the central states but still delivering a legitimately snow-supportive setup for the East Coast. Here's the kicker. When cold sits closer to the coastline, the storm track hugs the coast too, instead of sliding harmlessly out to sea. Great news if you love snow. As a bonus, March mirrors February almost exactly, raising the real possibility of winter stretching later than usual. Zoomed out, September through November paints fall as a positive PNA season, colder centered over the central and eastern states, with warmth pushing up the East Coast especially in October and November. Still, expect scattered cold intrusions, even if they're not the dominant theme. Once winter fully arrives, that cold expands and intensifies, while the East Coast lands close to normal. But snow potential looks strong, and the interior and central states could see some seriously cold stretches. Now, let's talk moisture, month by month. August is fairly unremarkable, and September brings a broad, generalized wetter signal across most of the country, which is really where these lower resolution models show their limits, hinting at trends without pinpointing exact hotspots. October sharpens things up, with a clearly active storm track diving through the west, likely riding beneath that cold pool. From there, it curves toward the deep south and south-central states before reaching the east coast, suggesting an active nor'easter pattern brewing, consistent with last month's models and something nearly every model I've reviewed agrees on. Come November, that storm track eases slightly, but stays highly active along the classic nor'easter corridor, spilling into the eastern Gulf. Expect frequent thunderstorms and even winter severe weather threats across the deep south and Florida, fairly typical during El Niño years. And I think that influence shows up repeatedly this season alongside other factors. Out west, the storm track settles more toward the southwest, matching how an average El Niño behaves, though sometimes the northwest gets pulled in too. This model, though, keeps things notably dry up there. Heading into winter, that storm track compresses slightly further south, but the message stays the same, well above normal precipitation for the southeastern corner of the country and the southwest, with solid moisture spread across the entire south. January looks nearly identical, and this is a month where interior cold combines directly with an active storm track, which could translate into above-average snowfall for a lot of these regions. If the timing lines up with the cold, the East Coast could get pulled into some massive snow events too. The storms are clearly going to be there, and the cold looks locked in as well if this model verifies. Excellent news if you're rooting for a snowy winter, especially with a strong El Niño in play. February shows the West easing up, with only modest above normal precipitation, while the southeast and east coast stay locked into an extremely active pattern persisting since fall. By March, the whole setup flips. The northern and central states become the active zone, the west coast quiets down, and the deep south and southeast finally catch a break with something closer to normal precipitation after a fall and winter of well above average totals. Looking at the 3-month view, you can trace where these storms are expected to pound specific regions repeatedly, pointing toward an active fall overall, with severe weather remaining a real threat for the deep south through fall and into winter. For the winter stretch, the southeast, deep south, and southwest stay extremely active, while the northwest, Great Lakes, and Midwest stay notably dry, tracking logically with typical El Niño behavior. Now let's pivot to the CFS model. September comes in broadly warmer across the board. October is when cold air finally starts filtering in, though it's not centered over the central states this time. Instead, it reaches deep into the mid-Atlantic, Northeast, Midwest, Great Lakes, and Ohio Valley, along with a good chunk of the Southwest, where increased storminess and cloud cover could help suppress temperatures further. The Northwest and North-Central states trend warmer here, a clear departure from the previous model, and the Southeast follows that same warm trend. By November, the overall picture warms up a touch, aside from a slightly cooler Northeast and South Central region. December brings warmth across the entire East, but January is where the story shifts. Cooler air finally muscles in, mostly centered over the West and Central states, along with the Deep South, which tracks logically for an El Niño pattern. I'll be honest, that Western-centered cold trough is something I'd take with a heavy grain of salt, given current sea surface temperatures and recent history, which usually offer strong clues about what's coming. This signal runs counter to nearly everything else I'm seeing, so I lean toward calling it a likely bust, though I still want to show it since anything is technically possible. The upper Midwest, Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast stay warmer here. February changes the tone considerably, with much stronger cold finally breaking into the east. This model points toward a late developing winter, with February emerging as the coldest, most active stretch, and interestingly, that lines up with what CanSIPS showed too. March stays exceptionally cold across the central and eastern states as well, which honestly surprised me. Nearly every model I've looked at shows significant cold infiltrating the nation, not the textbook outcome for a strong El Niño. I genuinely believe other factors are driving this more than El Niño itself. Things like the PDO, the PNA pattern, recent Arctic oscillation trends, and the NAO. Basically everything outside of ENSO has favored the eastern half of the country the last 2 winters, and none of that has reversed yet, which gives real weight to the idea that cold could again dominate a large share of this upcoming winter. On precipitation, this model shows September without El Niño's fingerprints yet, but by October, that southern storm track becomes dominant, and the lack of activity in the Northwest, Northeast, or Great Lakes becomes obvious. November closely mirrors the previous model, with the Southwest, South-Central states, and especially the Deep South and Southeast running extremely active into late fall. Winter stays highly active along the Gulf and East Coast, reaching the interior eastern states, while the Southwest stays very wet too, reinforcing the same overall pattern. January looks nearly identical to December, with the Northwest the lone dry holdout. February keeps the entire East Coast extremely active, and remember, this is also the month this model shows a major surge of cold arriving. Combine an active storm track with well below normal temperatures over the east, and you've got a textbook recipe for major snowstorms. Both models are sending remarkably consistent signals here, which is what makes me genuinely optimistic if you're a cold and snow lover. The Southwest looks primed too. I'd expect the Sierra Nevada and Southern Rockies to have a phenomenal season, and I'm not ready to write off the Northwest either, even though guidance doesn't lean that way yet. By March, that nor'easter-dominated flow finally breaks down, again lining up with the previous model. And that's really the headline. When independent models converge on the same broad conclusions, that's not a coincidence. These systems ingest real-world data, and when that data consistently points one direction across different modeling approaches, it carries weight. That's exactly why I pay such close attention to consistency across these tools. Between both runs, the through line is impossible to ignore. Colder than average conditions dominating the central and eastern states, an unusually active storm track locking in across the south and east coast, and a real chance this fall and winter delivers some of the most memorable snow events we've seen in years. I'll be watching every update closely, and the moment the European and JMA models drop, I'll bring you the next chapter of this story.